What's the first time you remember thinking, I am a writer? I want to be a writer.
Oh, the first time I thought I want to be a writer, I was probably 8 years old, and I wrote a short story about a girl getting hit by a car, which is pretty dark, but feels very on brand. And then I didn't think that anymore because I didn't know any writers, and writers were just fancy people that, it's not like now, like kids have writers come visit their classes. I never had anything like that growing up. Like I never knew a writer. I didn't think that was something I could do. That's something that like fancy people did. And then I went to high school and I wrote a lot of really angsty poetry, as one does in high school. And then I went to college and I continued the track of very angsty poetry, as one does in college. And then through my 20s, I started writing short stories. And then I published a couple books of poetry. And that was very exciting. And then I published 2 novels on small presses, both of which are no longer exist. And then I sat down and was like, I'm going to write a young adult book. And I'm going to write a science fiction, because I love science fiction. I'm going to write a science fiction young adult book. And I wrote a story that was called Palimpsest, which is, it's a real thing. It has to do with like when people used to reuse paper, so you could see the writing underneath the writing when they would like rewash like the cloth paper that they had. Listen, I was extra. And so, so I wrote this book called Palimpsest, and the whole genesis of the whole thing in this book is that it's a science fiction book. It took place in New York City, where I live. And the magic system that existed was based on chess because, again, I'm extra. So it was like this whole entire competition of like chess, and like you had to move through across the board, and the board was represented by the city. Anyway, I spent at least 7 years rewriting this book, just writing it, rewriting it, rewriting it, rewriting it. I was like, this is going to be the book. This is going to be the book that gets me an agent. And it was, which was very cool. So I got an agent, and it was great. So just by the way, because I know that your lovely listeners like to know the all the gory details. So I did get an agent, but initially that agent rejected the book. And the only reason they accepted it is because I wrote them back, which is something most people don't ever do, and was like, hey, because they were like, I really like this, but I can't, I have to pass on it because the ending's just not working. And I was like, oh, but what if the ending was something else? Like, what can we just talk about this? And she was like, yeah, I'm happy to talk about it. And we had this like 16 email exchange about how the book could be changed. And they were like, if this feels good for you, change the book, send it back to me. It's what's called an R&R, revise and rewrite. I don't know why they have to say it twice. It's the same word. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. So I did the whole revise and rewrite, and I sent it back to that agent. And then I sent it to a couple other agents, and that agent was like, yeah, okay, it's working. Like, let's talk. And I was like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, it's happening. It's happening. Like my whole life, I've been dreaming for this. I'm going to get an agent. This is going to be amazing. Everything's going to come true. And so I signed with her, and she's still my agent. Her name is Rena, and she is a wonderful human being who I adore. And we signed with the book, and we went on submission, and every single publisher in the world rejected it. And I had what is called died on sub, which means your book. See, most people think like once you get the agent, it's like a half step up to the editor and like a half step up to the publishing deal. But like, it can be a little hairy in there. So every major publisher in the world said, no, thank you. And the reason they said no, thank you was because the major crux of the story was that the main character, while she was going through this like science fiction world, was looking for her grandfather. And everyone in publishing, and I'm talking like everyone, I can't think of a single imprint that didn't reject me. Like that's how hard we went. every single imprint was like, if you have a girl looking for her family, that's middle grade, that's not YA. And I was like, oh, teenagers can't care about their families, but okay, fine. So my agent was like, will you think about rewriting it and making it middle grade? And I was like, sure, because I say yes to anything. And so I did, and it broke me. And when I say it broke me, I mean, for the first time in my entire life, I was like, I'm never writing again. I hate this. I can't do this. I don't want to do it. It brings me no joy. It brings me pain and suffering and sadness and crying and laying in the floor fetal position. But I rewrote it. So I rewrote it and I sent it to my agent, and I knew it wasn't good. You know when something you write isn't good. I knew it wasn't good. I knew it wasn't working, but I didn't know what else to do. So because I get up to write every day, I think I took like a week off. Maybe I took like a few days off. But like the alarm went off at 4:45, and it was a new writing morning. And I turned on my laptop and I was like, okay, either you write something new or you never write anything again. And I sat down, and in 6 months, I wrote Ghost Girl. And I sent it to my agent, and she wrote me and said, this is your debut. And she was right. And that is my sad sack publishing story.
It has a happy ending.
It does have a happy ending.
Great horror of sad sack publishing stories. We went into the darkness, but by God, here we are.
Out into the light. See, but I mean, it is like, it's funny because I feel like a lot of people just don't. I know so many people whose books died on submission, and it's like one of those things that nobody talks about because it's like, it's just kind of taboo. This idea that like you were good enough to get an agent, but not good enough to get a publishing deal. And I hate it. So I talk about this on like every time someone wants to talk about my publishing journey. I'm like, here's how I failed for a long time. And then here's how it worked out. And I think part of it too, and I guess like if there's anyone out there who's listening who is a writer and is maybe in the querying trenches, which these days are pretty awful. The thing for me, like the choice between am I ever going to write again or what do I write next, is that I had a moment where I said, what were the books that mattered to you the most? And they weren't young adult books. They were middle grade books, because I fell in love with reading as a middle grade reader. And the books I fell in love with were scary stories. And so I purposefully said, well, let's just make something you would have loved. And I think that is what I think every writer in the world should carry in their heart every time they sit down to write something. Like, write the thing you would have loved. Write the thing that you want in the world. Write the thing that you think is missing, because you're the only person who can tell your story. And I know people say that a lot, and I know it's kind of sounds cliche, and I admit that it is, but like it's also really, really unbelievably true. Yeah. So yeah.
Well, in the interest of destigmatizing, I too had an agent and a manuscript that died on submission, and now I host a podcast where I talk to very successful authors. So there we go. I wanted to ask, now that you had Ghost Girl has been a big success, you're taking over middle grade horror by storm. This Appearing House is coming out. It's gonna crush. Is there a chance you bring back that young adult book and say, hey, you know what, young adult teens care about grandfathers. This is not, you don't stop empathizing or caring about your family when you are no longer a child.
You know, there was a moment a couple of years ago. I don't know if did you watch Queen's Gambit?
That's the chess one, right?
Yeah.
No, it's one of the million shows that's on my never-ending list of things to get to.
Sure. It's excellent, by the way. But there was a moment when that was like at the cultural zeitgeist and people were talking about it, and like editors were like, I want the next Queen's Gambit. And my agent was like, should we reshop this? Should we like see, let's put the chess book back out there and see how it does? And I was like, no. Only because while I spent 7 years writing it, I'm a very different writer right now. And if I'm going to put that book out, it needs work. Like I don't want to put that as a representation of my writing in the format it's in right now. It would need work. And I think also, I think I just want to let it be what it was, which was me learning how to write and learning how to tell a story and learning how to put in the work. And it got me an agent and it did what it needed to do. And I'm fine with that.